Okay, so welcome back, y'all. Today I'm going to be talking about, as you probably guessed from the title, the AK versus the AR. So, everybody that knows me knows I love AKs. I actually shot a competition once with a bunch of law enforcement guys. I was the only guy there with an AK. Looked like an idiot, but whatever. So what I have today to talk about is my Arsenal SLR 106 CR that has been pin and welded with a 4-inch Bulgarian 4-piece style flash hider. So it has a 12.5-inch barrel. And the reason I'm using this is because comparing it to my Mark 18 pistol, it's the closest comparison I got. They're both 5.56. Their barrels are within 2.5 inches of each other. It's the best comparison I could come up with. So, talking about that. So if I would much rather have a 12.5-inch AR to compare. I think 12.5 is kind of one of those Goldilocks barrel lengths for 5.56. I just don't have one right now, but we'll talk about it anyway. So this is actually a rifle. This is a pistol. I probably should get an actual AR rifle to compare, but whatever. So, real quick, lengthwise, clearly the Mark 18 is shorter. Even if I fold the stock on the AK, it's not going to be much shorter than the AR with the stock collapsed. It's just what it is. That's really not a fair comparison, and plus there are so many variants of AKs I could have gone with, and AR, AR lengths, whatever. They're both 5.56 guns. Ballistically, they're both going to be the same with the same barrel length. So, moving on. Let's talk about weight. Well, an AK, no matter how you slice it, is always going to be heavier than an AR. If they both have the same accessories bolted to them, doodads. If you put a light on it and a red dot, much like this, it's just going to be heavier because the AK has a long stroke gas piston assembly. The bolt carrier group is heavier and there's more weight up front. It's just a heavier gun. Plus these are made of steel, stamped steel receivers, versus the ARs are made of aluminum. Is what it is. Talking about some of the pluses and minuses of each. So AKs have world-renowned, reliability. They've been used all around the world in pretty much every conflict since 1947. The ARs, similarly, ever since they were introduced in the 60s, they've been pretty much, the U.S. has stuck with the AR since then, and it's evolved, to things like this. And this is kind of old school. Ergonomically, so you have to ask, what do you mean by ergonomically? When it comes to actually shooting the guns, I'll get into that actually. Ergonomics. So an AK is not as ergonomic as an AR, just plain as day. With an AR, you have things like, your firing hand can easily access the selector. You can reload with the firing hand, as far as drop the magazine, load the next. I have a bad lever on this one, so I could drop it and send the bolt home. But even if you didn't, it's like God, and as Clint Smith would say, it's like God and Eugene Stoner got together, and we put the bolt release right where your thumb goes when you reload. It's just a proficient person with an AR is going to be faster than a proficient person with an AK, because with an AK you have to rock out the old mag, get the new mag in. There are many types of reloads. This mag's stiff, I haven't fitted it yet, but many types of reloads with AKs. You have the old Russian kick it out with the old mag and locking you in. You have the beer can grip, which is one I prefer. Kick the old one out, rock the new one in like this. If you had to reload, you could also get the old mag out, grab your new one, and put your new one in. But just about no matter how you slice it, because it doesn't have a bolt hold limit feature, once you put a new mag in, you have to run the charging handle. It's just more steps that are required with an AK than an AR. So this has a Krebs safety on it, so it's a little bit better. But you know, with an AK, if you wanted to go for, you know, like low ready or whatever, you have to engage. That's not a big deal. But running with it and running and gunning with it, that gets a little cumbersome, especially if you switch to left-handed or whatever. You then have to come back to almost a mag welder and click the safety off while you're running again. Just one of those things. It's an older design than the AR a little bit, so it's a little behind on some things like modularity. It does have the ability to have a folding stock, like I talked about the MCX, because the recoil system's up here versus in the buffer tube in the stock itself of the AR. Talking about modularity, so obviously the AR ones. Yes, Seneco stuff is awesome and expensive and heavy. One of these days I will Seneco one of these up. But for the most part, like this gun, when I got it, it had this Fab Defense railed handguard on it. And I've just stuck with it because it was on there. You can get an Ultimac, which is an awesome piece of gear for an AK, you know, for like 90 bucks ish. You know, allows you to put a Picatinny on here, a rail on up top. And I honestly haven't had an issue with this Holosun as far as it baking or anything with any of my AKs. It also allows you to get a light mount. This is a common style of setup for AK, to have a, you know, scout style light up here, and then your dot back towards the back of the rail. Problem with the Ultimac is AKs are known for getting hot. You know, you see guys range with one glove on because, well, they get hot up here. Well, the Ultimac, the problem is that this is part of that too. It gets hot. So if your hand's right here, it gets hot really quick. So I've adapted to where I actually put my hand on the light to keep my hand off of the rail. And that's why I have this Magpul old school AFG on it. Is it's just one more thing to keep my hand further away from the hotness of the gun. It still gets hot. I still don't really need to wear gloves, but it's not as bad with this. ARs, on the other hand, not so much the case. Yes, they do still get hot, but it's just not as big of a thing. So reloads, yes. Faster AR, yes. You can run really well with an AK if you train with it. One cool thing about AKs is, you know, in the movies you see the mags double taped. Well, if you do that, you know, and you rock one out, and then you can turn around and lock the other one in. So you can like carry like 60 rounds or whatever. Is that practical? Not really, because if you have to go to the ground, the magazine's on the bottom, and you're putting rounds right into the dirt. So that mag, not too reliable, I wouldn't say. Talking about that, magazines. So there's another point for the AR. You know, the ARs, standard GI cheap mags, they work great. You got mag poles and all this and that. You can get mags all day for 13, 14 bucks, right? AKs. So unless you're running a 7.62 by 39 AK, and you use steel mags, which are heavy as crap when they're fully loaded, most of the other AK calibers are expensive to get magazines for and hard to find. So like this Circle 10 Bulgarian black magazine, if you can find them right now, they're $60+ on average, typical, and they're pretty hard to find. Whereas you can go to any gun store and or whatever and find a GI style magazine for an AR. And honestly, you'd probably be easier to find Magpul stuff than the GI stuff. But yes, this is an old. I don't even remember where I got this, like 20 years ago. But you have like these mags, you know, typical. Some magazines easier to get with the AR. We're in the US. This is the gun we went with, so parts are going to be more easily available. When it comes to parts, so not only magazines but parts. The AK market in the last 5-6 years has come a long way, even really in the last 10 years, but it's still lagging greatly behind the AR market. There are aftermarket parts for it, hence like this is not the Holosun, Red Dot's not specific. The Haley Strategic Thorn Mount, that's not specific. This Fab Defense, it's kind of cheap, so whatever. That's actually not from the U.S. So Picatinny's there. ALG did come out with these triggers, and they are phenomenal. It puts the trigger on par with any AR trigger you can get. But as far as mounting, aside from the Ultimac, you do typically sometimes have side rails on these. That's not the greatest solution. And then other than that, if you're not going to go with an Ultimac or a side rail, you have to go with like Zenico stuff, and that's costly. You can almost buy an AR. You can buy a whole new AR, a bare bones one, for which it would cost for Zenico furniture. So they're kind of a hipster gun almost now, but that's the world we live in. Thanks for banning them, Obama. So AR stuff. ARs they're just, well, they're not as fragile, or they're not as, I would say, durable. Parts do break on them, seemingly more than AKs. They do go down a little bit more often. However, usually with an AR, when it goes down, you could remedy it pretty fast as far as like malfunctions. When an AK, they do go down with malfunctions, and when they do, they usually go down bad, and it usually takes a lot of work to get them back in operation. They're just the way because there's so much space in here and stuff. There's just, when they do screw up, it just locks the gun up a lot of times. So they're not perfect by any means. And let's see, so talked about that. Yeah, AKs are heavier. They're kind of they will generally run longer without maintenance than an AR, generally. And that's more so with 7.62 by 39 and 5.45 by 39. With 5.56, you do have to clean them on a regular basis still, because just the design of the case, it's not as reliable as, say, a 5.45, because this is kind of what they call a straight wall case versus a tapered case. So that's why I picked that 5.56 AK, because talking about that, trying to level the playing field. Yeah. So which one would I pick? Really, I don't care. I got into AKs because it was something new, to me. I wanted to try it, and I really like them. I do like the way that they shoot. Recoil wise, 5.56 AK versus 5.56 AR. AK is going to have a heavier recoil impulse. There's just more bolt mass coming back, and like this 106, a little bit, it's heavy gassed, so it's got more oomph behind it when it cycles. I could probably fix that with a K&S piston, or if I ever SBR'd it, I could put a adjustable gas block on it and tone it down some. It's not really that big of a deal, because there are ARs that are heavily gassed too, like the Daniel Defense Mark 18s, or the take your pick of some of the other ones that are combat gassed, I guess you could say. But another thing about these is natural stock alignment with the gun. They tend to have they're a sloped stock design to where it's most of the mass of the bolt carrier group is it's above the line of the stock. So there's a more inclination of a little bit of muzzle flip versus the straight design of the AR, where the bolt carrier is in line with the buffer tube. Imagine that. So they tend to have a lot straighter back recoil impulse. Makes them more controllable, and you tend to stay on target faster. Again, which one would I pick? It really doesn't matter. It really boils down to this kind of splitting hairs between them. I honestly, if I could only pick one rifle, I'm holding the AK, but I would not pick this AK. I wouldn't pick a gun that I can't find mags for. Same with any of the other AKs, honestly, because the magazines are what feeds the gun. Ammunition does too. So 7.62 by 39, 5.45 by 39. I love those calibers, but we depend on their import. If they ban the import of them, we're out of luck. Not being able to find it, go try to find 5.45 in your local gun store. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to find any. 7.62 by 39 is not as bad, but 5.56 you can find all day long, and that's why this is like my go-to AK, because it's 5.56. But again, going back to if whatever doomsday or whatever scenario you had in your mind, I'd have to retain these mags because I've only got so many of them, and I can't just swap them out with people. Whereas if you got something that takes AR mags, if you weren't keeping track of your magazines and you ran low, you could grab from your buddy or whatever. Same vice versa. It's just everybody has AR stuff. So honestly, now let me clarify. This would not be my go-to gun either. The effective range of this thing is only like 80 to 100 meters. So that is not what I would consider a go-to caliber, or as far as barrel length and terminal effects. This one, being this 12.5 inch barrel, it's kind of one of those Goldilocks, as I said in another video, barrel lengths that you don't lose a lot of velocity, and I'll cover that in another video. But honestly, my ideal, if I can only have one rifle like this, I would pick an AR with, say, a 12.5 inch barrel. That would give you all the velocity you need to reach out as far as you can see with positive, and you'd have to have magnified optics to have positive ID of your target, which is important. So just really, that would be shooter preference there. But if it were me, I'd go with an AR. That's the world we live in. We're in a country that has been run by the AR for so long. There's an infrastructure there when it comes to parts and ammunition and magazines, and that's what I would choose. If I had to shoot a lot, I would do this, because I know how to change out barrels. You can't change out barrels on your own unless you have a press and other expensive tools on an AK. You're just not doing it unless you know how to do it and you have all the expensive tools. So I think that pretty much covers everything I was going to talk about. There will be another video coming up on some other 5.56 stuff, and I'll have these back, but until then, this is probably it. So remember, these are just tools. Okay, you're a weapon. So until next time, I'll be back.